My name is Jenica Smith, and I'm a new full-time faculty member in the English program. Before becoming a faculty member at SWIC, I spent several years providing Blackboard support and instructional design assistance to faculty at an institution in Arkansas. During that time, I helped faculty build quality online courses. In this video, I'll share with you some tips on how to write effective course objectives based on our checklist for best practices in online education. This video will discuss the following items: how to write course and unit level objectives that are clear and measurable, how to provide instructions to ensure students' understanding on how to achieve those objectives, assessing if the learning objectives are appropriate for the level of the course, and writing your objectives from the student's perspective. Your course objectives are the starting point for any kind of course design that you want to do. With this in mind, you want to consider the following when it comes to your course level objectives. 1. Are your course level objectives going to be decided or assigned by your program or your department? If that's the case, then you'll be using some predetermined course objectives. 2. Your course objectives should provide just a general overview of what the students are going to be learning from the course. You want to save really specific objectives for your unit level objectives. 3. You want to make sure it's not an exhaustive list. You don't want to have 100 course objectives that your students are going to be trying to achieve over the course of the semester. Ideally, you want to keep that number under 15, with 5 to 7 really being the sweet spot for the number of course level objectives. Now, if your program has a huge number of course level objectives, probably what you want to do is spread those out between the unit level objectives and come up with some broad category course level objectives that those can fit underneath. Finally, you want to make sure that your course level objectives are prominently featured in the course. Typically, this is done in the syllabus, so somewhere towards the beginning of the syllabus you have your course level objectives. Alternatively, or additionally, you might also have them as part of an introductory unit to the entire course. It's always a good idea to replicate those course objectives somewhere also in the course outside of the syllabus. So your unit level objectives are essentially your course level objectives broken down into their basic components. Usually these are not assigned by your department or the program, and they're meant to be more specific than your course level objectives, because you're really getting into the building blocks of what's going to help your students achieve those course level objectives. But you don't want to overwhelm your students with giving them too many unit level objectives at once. You want to keep that number somewhere between 5 and 7, with 7 being the extreme number that you want to assess within a given unit, but it also depends on how long that unit is. Now, if your unit takes half the semester to complete, obviously you're going to probably want to assess more unit level objectives in that unit, but if your units are fairly short, so like maybe 2 to 3 weeks or 4 weeks, something like that, you do want to keep your number of unit level objectives somewhere between 5 and 7. And just like with the course level objectives, you want to make sure that these unit level objectives are prominently featured in your course. So somewhere at the start of the unit, the students are given those unit level objectives. To develop good objectives, you first have to decide what you want your students to know or be able to do. You want to decide the level you want them to do it at, and you want to choose an appropriate measurable verb. Now, I've typically used the Bloom's taxonomy of verbs whenever I'm trying to decide what my objectives are going to be, particularly with my unit level objectives. But that being said, you can use whatever educational framework you prefer. You just want to make sure that you're using measurable action verbs that will assess the students at the level of understanding that's appropriate for the course. And the most important thing to remember is that good verbs are the basis of good objectives. So one of the strategies that I normally use when coming up with objectives is to use the SMART method. So that means making sure that your objectives are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-oriented. So when we talk about an objective being specific, what we really mean is that you're describing the result that is desired in a way that is detailed, focused, and well-defined. So instead of saying, I want my students to write well, you want to be really specific about what writing well actually means. A better objective would be, students are able to build papers around a central controlling idea, supported by concrete details, examples, and reasoning. Additionally, your unit level objectives will likely be more specific than your course level objectives. For example, one of my course level objectives is to critically evaluate their own work and the work of others. So my students have to evaluate the writing that they do and the writing of their peers and the writing of any authors that we bring into the course. A specific way for them to do that within the unit is to identify and reflect on strategies for self and peer assessment. So that is a unit level objective that relates to that course level objective. So when we talk about making an objective measurable, what you're really talking about is how will you evaluate your student's success. To be measurable, an objective should describe an achievement or an outcome which is or can be related to a percentage, a frequency, a rate, or a number. To help in setting measurable outcomes, think about the desired outcome and what elements can be measured. Consider whether there is any reference for cross-comparison. So like a pre-diagnostic test at the start of a course would give you a foundational starting point for where your students are and what level you want them to achieve. You want to make sure you're using a verb that allows for a concrete measurement of learning. For example, you can't really measure understanding because that is an internal process for the student. But you can measure their ability to perform an action that demonstrates understanding. For example, in a nursing program, the students need to be able to identify different anatomical structures. You can measure how many of those structures are correctly or incorrectly identified, which demonstrates they understand how to recognize those items. Next, you want to make sure that your objectives are achievable for the level of the course and/or the unit the students are working within. You want to scaffold your learning objectives so that students are gaining knowledge and understanding in a hierarchical way. So you want to ask yourself these questions. Where are students in the learning process? What knowledge or information is needed for them to achieve this objective? What are the steps a student needs to take to achieve this objective? And can this objective be scaffolded? Using the nursing example from before, I wouldn't expect a student to demonstrate how to draw blood from a patient before that student can correctly list the steps for how to draw that blood safely. Relevant objectives provide a clear understanding of how the objective might be reached through the materials in the course. For example, one of my objectives is analyze the relationship between assertion and evidence in a diverse range of texts. I then provide students with materials on how to perform an analysis. We then analyze text together as a class, and then they have to write their own analysis paper for the assessment. So you want to make sure that you're providing your students with instructions on how they can complete these different objectives that you're going to assign to them. And those instructions are usually part of your course assessments, your instructional materials, or your learning activities. So you just want to make sure that you're making a clear correlation between those items and your learning objectives. And then the last piece of your SMART objectives are making sure they're time-oriented. So this is probably the easiest element of the SMART objective. When do you want your students to be able to demonstrate their understanding? Course level objectives are typically expected to be completed by the end of the semester or the end of the course. Unit level objectives are typically expected to be completed by the end of the unit. Finally, you want to make sure your learning objectives, particularly the unit level objectives, are written in an understandable way for your students. The language needs to be accessible for the level of student in the course. So when you're trying to decide how to write your learning objectives from the student's perspective, you want to think about, can students easily understand what I'm trying to say in my objectives? Could a non-native speaker easily understand the meaning and the purpose of why I'm asking them to do these objectives? How much discipline-specific jargon or unexplained terminology are you going to use? And then, is your language unnecessarily complex? Is there a way that you could maybe simplify the way that you're stating things so that students have a better understanding of what it is that they are trying to achieve or that you expect of them? For more tips on how to make your online class more effective, Please check out our checklist for best practices in online education, as well as the other videos in this series.